Okay. First of all, I share gratitude with my colleagues, the architecture lead, and Parsons for putting up with us this week, and so particularly your patience with the dialogue today. Glad to be here with colleagues. So given the theme of the prize this year, the Lead Prize this year, it's different. Tonight I'll offer a couple examples about how architecture is different today through the interconnected examples of my recent fieldwork, research, and publications as a mode of practice, guided by a methodology of exploitation. The German thinker Peter Sloterdijk has proposed that the last couple of centuries have not been engaged in modernization, paradigm shifts, or revolutions, claims that nonetheless characterize much of architectural discourse. Rather, for Sloterdijk, the progression of recent history is much more about the acceleration of another operation that he names exploitation. In this operation, everything that is implicit and accepted assumption becomes increasingly explicit. In his writing, he offers multiple examples from gas warfare to environmental thinking. Tonight, I'll offer how exploitation drives aspects of my own work, primarily by identifying tactical latencies, as evident in one recent book and one recent building. To start, a recent book publication on thermally active surfaces departs from one very simple question, which is, why do we heat and cool buildings with air? In other words, how did a thermodynamically and physiologically irrational medium of heat transfer, air, become the dominant means of heating and cooling? Air is an irrational medium because it is 850 times less dense than water. You can simply capture and channel much more energy in water than you can in air. This is why the body, too, is a thermally active surface. It channels heat energy from its core to your skin and vice versa as its primary thermal system. So you can imagine what would happen if we heated and cooled our bodies with air. Our bodies, the vein, the heart, the lungs, the caloric intake, all would be about 800 times bigger than they are, which is irrational. It would be absurd. So it is hard to imagine why we choose to design buildings around that idea. Because our bodies are thermally active surfaces, it is my view that buildings should finally occupy that same thermodynamic space as our physiology, as a basis of a more efficacious building design strategy for this century. In such an approach, just as in the human body, the thermal conditioning of a building is decoupled from its ventilation system by using the activated mass of the building itself as the thermal system, thereby minimizing, if not eliminating, familiar air-based systems and all the frankly boring, expensive, and abject junk that goes with them. In doing so, thermally active surfaces trigger a cascading set of advantages for architecture, including lower energy consumption, more durable buildings, more healthy buildings, more integrated buildings and design teams, and perhaps most importantly for me, new formal potential through thermodynamic configuration. Importantly, I see this as an architectural advancement of building technologies. This is a direct consequence of an otherwise neglected conflation of matter and energy in architecture. Traditionally, these systems have been regarded as disparate, with their own courses, consultants, histories, theories, etc. This division is fundamentally false. The reality is that matter is but captured energy. So in addition to adjusting some of architecture's basic assumptions about energy and matter, there are some more overtly instrumental implications of thermally active surfaces that point to more agency for architecture. One example, for instance, is that thermally active surfaces approaches defragment our inordinately complicated buildings and design practices into much more simple and pithy efforts that yield more complex behaviors, which is what I'm more interested in. And a case of that includes this phenomenon of thermal asymmetry and thermal symmetry is essentially one ideal diagram for a thermally active surface building is that all the surfaces around your body are active and you end up insanely much more comfortable, but also using radically less energy in that process. So if any of these ideas about thermally active surfaces make sense to you, a perfectly reasonable question becomes, well, then why do we heat and cool buildings with air? And the answer to that question is historical. So this book has chapters that explicate the parallel histories of radiant and convective transfer techniques throughout history. In terms of air, I look most closely at the compelling insights and even more compelling oversights that guided Willis Haviland Carrier, here dressed as a wet bulb thermometer, and his derivation of the psychrometric chart and his subsequent industrial enterprises. In short, while perfectly aware of its physiological significance, Carrier simply ignored the role of radiant transfer, primarily because his initial thoughts about air conditioning had nothing to do with human comfort, but rather solving problems with hygroscopic machines, such as printing presses in Brooklyn or cigarette factories in North Carolina, not the bodies that operated these machines. And the logics of these air-based systems were only marginally adjusted when they migrated to buildings. In respect of radiant transfer, I focus on the 3,000 plus year history of this converged material and energy system that began with the Korean on-dole to the successes of 20th century thermoelectric surface architecture such as Deuter's, Deuter's open air school in Amsterdam, as well as that century's metallurgical failures that have hampered the momentum of this approach to constructing thermoactive surfaces. And together within the book, these histories arrive in this matrix, which illustrates the number of systems of a number of canonical building envelopes from the 20th century, and divides them up into air and water-based energy systems. And in all cases, the air systems used more layers, more systems, more labor, more embodied energy, et cetera, et cetera. So this book ultimately explicates alternate physiological, thermodynamic, historical, economic, and most importantly, alternate design trajectories of the discipline in this century that can increase our agency and open up new possibilities. One such possibility is much lower technology but higher performance building. The following building is a small design it, build it project. And as part of my work, I typically construct one project each summer. And this project is called the Stack House, which is the 7th project on the same site, which is an old silver mining claim called the Georgia Bar, located in the upper Arkansas River Valley, located just in central Colorado. And it was recently the site of a Valentino photo shoot. Amazing what beautiful people do for otherwise unhandsome buildings. The Stack House is the most remote of all of these projects. And the hilltop site can ultimately be accessed only by foot, which drove a number of parameters for this kind of project, including the minimal amount of concrete one would want to bring to such a site. But the Stack House, what's interesting about the Stack House is that it's a solid wood building. It's built out of 6x8 spruce timbers, an example of which you can see in the gallery next door. But these members are used for the structure, the enclosure, the insulation, the finished materials, everything that goes into a particular building envelope. It's a very, it's a simple volume of space. It's a set of steel boxes that frame a whole set of views to the adjacent landscape. The big window looks down the valley to the south. Actually, not part of it. Other windows that look back at the other buildings. One that's down quite low for his grandchildren to look at. And this guy's a former Olympic kayaker, so the river is very important to him. But what bears explication in the discussion tonight is the assembly, different aspects of the assembly. The roof is a ruled surface, so it has an asymmetrical belly on one side, bed flat on the other side. That results in each joist being slightly different. It adds all but 17 minutes to the construction schedule, but adds considerable performance to the space, both for removing snow and rain, but also other factors on the interior that I'll talk about. Which is, I see this as a latency within any kind of roof surface that they can be doing much more work. So that roof up top is part roof, part skate park there, just during construction. But on the interior, it operates to bounce light around and to also don't sound around it about the interior. The inaugural performance in the space was a production of Mamma Mia by the Leonard's grandkids. So these sorts of things matter there. But it's a subtle surface in the space, a lot of people miss it. But it's the walls that I think deserve the most attention. That's what I'll spend some time on this evening. So again, they're all the systems are embedded into this one layer 6x8 spruce. This is quite distinct from how one would normally build a wall and how normal building scientists suggest how we should build a contemporary wall. And this is how a number of other projects that I built at the Georgia Bar were constructed. So one would normally start with stud framing and build up a multi-layered assembly with insulation, plywood, and a lot of other layers that have fairly intense industrial processes attached to them. And that results in a quite high, in this case, embodied energy value for that wall. It also results in a fairly, I start to see or visualize as a fairly vulgar material geography for that approach to construction as well. And this stands in distinction to the stack house wall, which is a mono-layered system. All the spruce for this project was grown in the same valley, in the Arkansas Valley. It was milled and air dried in the same valley. Which results in a radically lower embodied energy value for that and a much different material geography for that wall. And it's all this leads to an idea that we're not really designing the externalities of architecture, and I think that's one reason that we're seeing a receding horizon of practice and agency today. So I think these eco-logistics need to be much more than just these little matters of fact, but just taken much more seriously as a matter of design concern. And so in this case, one outcome of that kind of thinking is that, in one sense, in a more crude sense, more money was spent on the building itself rather than driving or paying some guy to drive wood from Georgia or somebody to drive insulation from Kansas. There's nothing architectural about that, but there is something architectural about stacking up the wood in this particular way. Another seeming matter of fact that is really a matter of design concern deals with otherwise typically unconsidered properties of wood. Stack house is a thermally active surface building, even though it doesn't have hydronic tubes or any other power running into the building. There's actually no energy systems going into this building other than sun certain times of the day. So it's interesting from my point of view to explicate the building's performance, which is verified when the owner calls me in the middle of February and it's 10 below outside and he's inside in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt doing his reading and yoga and painting in that space. And the performance of this building that's totally net zero and is actually a carbon sink that I'll get to in a minute has nothing to do with ideas about R values or what typical building science suggests how we think about walls today. Rather, in this case, especially important in a solid wood building, such as this, is the role of thermal diffusivity, which is a property I've never heard discussed in architecture. It's the thermal conductivity divided by the specific heat of wood, which is actually what architects often call thermal mass, but have never really designed around it or done the calculations for it. And it's certainly left out of all the kind of modeling, energy modeling software. So there's these whole realms of real performance of spaces and architecture and materials and energy systems that we're intentionally leaving out in the same way that Carrier left out radiant transfer when he was thinking about air conditioning. And so we're doing this all over again and making the same sorts of mistakes. But this Ashby chart, which is here he's showing kind of where these two axes cross, is an ideal set of materials for a trom wall system. Of course, this building, the stack house, is not a trom wall. It's not treating the wall as a thermal battery. But it does show some things like a stainless steel would actually be a pretty good trom wall, which is a beautiful idea in itself. But in this solid wood construction, what wants to happen is that you want to slide the diffusivity down a bit and have activity around so that you can sit in the winter in his shorts. And it turns out that wood is quite good at this kind of range between not being, it's dense enough to absorb heat, but not dense enough to be overly conductive. And spruce is particularly less dense and well suited for this job. And so, keeping with my lab coat on here, you can see that that despite the great external temperature fluctuations, the internal surface temperatures remain relatively constant in this space. And so, images like this begin to explicate not only the building's performance, but begins to demonstrate how inadequate a lot of aspects of contemporary building science actually is. And again, once you start to explicate these notions, there's do sort of open up other possibilities. Another kind of potential matter of fact that I think is a real matter of design concern increasingly, especially with Jason's and Natalie's melting ice floor in mind. Another aspect of this building is that it's the only building that I know that is sequestered twice as much carbon as it took to produce the building itself. So when you start to add up all of the carbon that it took to produce different material systems in this building, and you compare that with the amount of carbon that's sequestered by the wood itself, you subtract out those materials, you end up with this surplus which is equal to the material itself. Or you can build a whole other stack house, I guess. This would be ahead, which is, that's other possibilities, other geographies associated with it that are increasingly less trivial. And one thing that I like about this is that this is not a strategy about efficiency or anything like that. Fundamentally, it's a strategy about surplus. And that's what I've told architecture was have surplus beyond building. And so it's an approach to energy and material systems, not efficiency. I have a couple more minutes. I'll just quickly click through how some of these same ideas are deployed at a larger scale. This is the massive house, which is a competition for a brick office building in Portland, Maryland. Sites across the bay from downtown Baltimore. For the brick building, I tend to begin with the massing strategy with the brick itself, which is, if you're Dutch, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. But if you're a guy like Nice, it's a very serious architectural proposition and an ordering system. But in this case, the brick ends up being modified by a series of portholes that create entries, loading docks, and self-shading surfaces, such as this south-facing surface, which creates the entry for the loading dock, but also during the overheated period is entirely self-shading, which is normally shown by the images here that are evaporated. Anyway, so this conflation of material and energy is what produces the kind of constructional strategy. It's what produces the configuration of this building. In this case, the wall is the masonry is essentially highly durable formwork for a very lightweight type of concrete. Has a very low U value. It's again this kind of monolayer wall. Expectation of this performance under certain conditions that creates extremely durable architecture that I guess suggests a certain kind of optimism about the future. It might be worth doing this. But issues of durability, resilience, and adaptability are fundamental to the thinking in this proposal. But there's other aspects of this configuration of this building. It's driven by thoughts about specifically generic in architecture, where in this case the ground floor plan here is much more figured because there's more explicit programs. But as you move up to the building, the corbelled wall sections create more idiosyncratic spaces that are well suited for seminar rooms or lobbies and this sort of thing. But by the time you get to the upper floors, it's much more kind of true generic office space. But of course, the floors of brick are what create light shafts for air and light to get into the spaces. And of course, the horizontal structural system is a thermal active surface structure, which relates to these themes of durability and resilience. So, especially as I've been looking at the work going up in the gallery, I see certain themes that are quite continuous. I think we all share certain obsessions with intricacy and accumulation. In my case, I think the intricacy is best understood in terms of the physics and the physiology of the space, and the accumulation is usually in terms of some kind of dump mass. Which is not to say any of these things are more beautiful than others, but I'm appreciating looking at those qualities in particular in the gallery. So again, whether in research and publications or in design and fabrication, the role of explication in my practice serves to question assumptions and to identify specific strategies and making tactics and advance the specificity and agency of architecture in the century. Thank you.